What if the most emotionally intelligent person in the room was also the most dangerous? Not because they're cruel, not because they enjoy watching others suffer, but because they know exactly how to make you trust them, and exactly how to use that trust as leverage. This is not your typical narcissist, not the loud abuser or the cold manipulator. This is the one who listens, remembers, and calculates. The one who mirrors your pain, only to use it later. The one who understands you so deeply they can destroy you without ever raising their voice. In this video, we're stepping into the psychological labyrinth Carl Jung feared the most, the dark empath, a personality that blends emotional sensitivity with strategic manipulation. We're going to explore what modern psychology reveals about this rising archetype, why dark empaths are often more charming, more trusted, and more destructive than narcissists, how Carl Jung's concept of the shadow explains their true power, and why the rise of empath culture may be creating more harm than healing. But more importantly, we'll show you how to recognize the dark empath in others, and how to confront the part of yourself that might already be becoming one. Because the real danger isn't just that you'll meet a dark empath, it's that you'll mistake them for your soulmate, or worse, your savior. Let's begin. They're not loud, they don't rage, they don't dominate a room like a textbook narcissist. A dark empath doesn't need to, because they've already bypassed the defenses that most manipulators struggle with. They've already earned your trust, and that's the trap. For decades, we believed empathy was a virtue, a psychological safeguard. If someone could feel your pain, they were less likely to cause it. But in 2021, researchers including Nadja Hayam shattered that illusion. Their study, published in Personality and Individual Differences, identified a disturbing hybrid, the dark empath, a person who possesses high levels of cognitive empathy, combined with the manipulative, self-serving traits of what psychology calls the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. This isn't someone who simply understands emotions, it's someone who understands them strategically. There are two kinds of empathy most people never differentiate: affective empathy, where you actually feel another's pain, and cognitive empathy, where you understand it without feeling it yourself. The dark empath lives entirely in the second category. They can read you like a book, know when you're vulnerable, know exactly what to say, but they remain emotionally untouched, like a surgeon staring at an open wound, precise but not present. Unlike narcissists, they don't repel you, they pull you closer. They mirror your wounds, validate your stories, offer comfort at exactly the right moment. But underneath that calculated kindness is something colder, a quiet need for control. Because what they're after is not connection, it's advantage, your loyalty, your attention, your submission. And when you've outlived your usefulness, when you no longer serve their ego or narrative, they vanish, not with cruelty, but with cold indifference. You're left wondering what you did wrong. And they don't correct you, because the confusion you feel is part of the design. Haim's study revealed something chilling. Nearly 1 in 5 people may exhibit this pattern. That means this isn't rare. This isn't a monster in the dark. It's a mask worn in daylight. Dark empaths aren't just lovers or bosses. They're therapists, friends, even healers, the very people we go to when we need safety. And maybe that's the most disturbing truth. The dark empath doesn't hide in your nightmares. They hold your hand while you fall asleep. They know how to speak the language of healing, but beneath it, they're building leverage. They weaponize what you reveal. So what do you do when empathy, the thing we're told to trust, becomes a weapon? You stop assuming that emotion equals morality. You start looking at how empathy is used, not just whether it exists. And most importantly, you begin to ask the question Carl Jung feared the most. What happens when the mask of light is just a vessel for deeper darkness? Now that we've seen the problem, we need to dissect it. Let's break down exactly how the dark empath operates, what to look for, and how to defend against the softest form of psychological warfare. Not every danger announces itself with sharp edges. Some arrive wrapped in warmth, some even help you heal, before they use your healing as a leash. The dark empath is one of the most elusive psychological profiles in the modern psyche, charming, emotionally intelligent, and devastatingly strategic. It's not just that they feel what you feel, they know what to do with it, and they know how to use it. 1. They possess cognitive empathy, not affective empathy. Empathy, as we imagine it, feels safe, but not all empathy is created equal. Psychologists distinguish between affective empathy, where you feel another's emotions, and cognitive empathy, where you understand those emotions without emotionally engaging with them. The dark empath thrives in the second category. According to a 2021 study published in Personality and Individual Differences by Haim et al., this personality type can read your emotional state with alarming accuracy, but with none of the emotional resonance that creates true human connection. Take this scene. You're confiding in a friend about your fear of abandonment. They nod, offer warmth, even share their own story. You feel seen, but weeks later, during a moment of conflict, they disappear without explanation, knowing full well it will trigger your deepest insecurity. They didn't forget what you said. They remembered too well. They're not heartless. They're just not with you emotionally. They're beside you, studying your patterns like a chessboard. 2. They rank high in the dark triad. What makes the dark empath dangerous isn't just what they feel, it's what they carry beneath the surface. The same 2021 study categorized them as scoring significantly higher than average in narcissism, ego inflation, Machiavellianism, manipulative strategy, and psychopathy, emotional detachment. But here's the twist. These traits are masked by empathy, making them hard to detect. Imagine someone who craves admiration, carefully manipulates social dynamics, and feels little remorse, but still remembers your birthday, checks in after your surgery, and mirrors your emotions perfectly. That's not contradiction, that's camouflage. The dark empath is the wolf that learned not to wear sheep's clothing, but to knit it from your own wool. 3. They are social chameleons. They don't stand out as cold or cruel. On the contrary, many dark empaths are extroverted, likable, and socially agile. The Guardian's 2024 piece on dark empathy described these individuals as narcissists, only more devious, because they don't alienate people the way classic narcissists do. They're often popular, trusted, admired. Picture this: a team leader who always seems to know exactly what each employee needs to hear. They're charming in meetings, disarming in conflict. But somehow, despite their friendliness, people often leave interactions second-guessing themselves. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Charisma without conscience is manipulation made palatable. 4. Their manipulation is subtle. Dark empaths don't explode. They don't shame you openly. They operate in the gray space between kindness and coercion. One of their key tools is selective withdrawal, pulling back emotional warmth when they feel threatened, making you feel like the aggressor. Let's say you call them out on a boundary-crossing comment. You expect a conversation, but instead they go quiet for days. No reply, no explanation. You spiral. You wonder, was I too harsh? And eventually you apologize. This is not resolution, it's reversal. You're no longer the one seeking clarity, you're the one seeking forgiveness. They weaponize your self-awareness against you, and you thank them for it. 5. They're more common than you think. Perhaps the most unsettling part? Dark empaths are not rare. According to Haim's study, nearly 1 in 5 participants fit the profile to some degree. That's not a monster in a castle. That's a colleague, a partner, a friend. They're drawn to helping roles, not to help, but to position themselves in places where emotional access is freely given. Therapists, coaches, spiritual influencers, people who seem to radiate empathy but extract something in return. When empathy becomes a currency, intimacy becomes the debt. This isn't about paranoia. It's about pattern recognition. These people are not evil, but they are unresolved. They've learned to mimic light without integrating shadow, and so their empathy is not rooted in love. It's engineered for leverage. Carl Jung once warned, every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol, morphine, or idealism. Some dark empaths are addicted to perception itself, the feeling of being needed, admired, understood. But without integration, perception becomes possession. and your emotions become tools they quietly sharpen. Understanding this profile is not about fear, it's about awareness. The real question isn't whether you've encountered a dark empath, it's whether they've already mapped your emotional terrain and whether you're ready to reclaim it. We often think the battle is between good and evil, between light and dark. But Carl Jung warned of a more insidious danger, the battle between light and false light, between people who appear kind, sensitive, even enlightened, but whose empathy is severed from integrity. For Jung, the greatest threat wasn't the monster who knows it's a monster, it was the healer who refuses to see their own capacity for harm. Jung believed that every human being carries a shadow, the unconscious part of the self, built from what we suppress, deny, or fear. Rage, envy, lust, control, it doesn't disappear, it waits, hidden beneath politeness, morality, even spiritual language. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." In other words, what you refuse to see in yourself doesn't die, it drives you from beneath the surface. The dark empath is a textbook expression of an unintegrated shadow. On the outside, they may be warm, attentive, gentle. But because they have never faced their own darker impulses, because they believe empathy is their essence, they become enslaved by the very qualities they deny. Instead of owning their anger, they manipulate through silence. Instead of admitting resentment, they gaslight you into guilt. Instead of recognizing their ego, they build identities around victimhood. The more convinced you are of your goodness, the more dangerous you become when your darkness leaks through. Jung saw this firsthand. In his Wolfman case, 1928, he treated a man who presented as deeply sensitive, spiritual, even selfless. But beneath that light was a cold, calculated detachment and a latent desire for control that bordered on sadism. This case changed how Jung saw the good person. It wasn't always goodness. Sometimes it was repression, light without shadow, which eventually collapses under its own illusion. Empaths, particularly those who define themselves by that word, are at unique risk. Many are genuinely sensitive, intuitive, tuned into others' emotions. But in a culture that rewards emotional fluency while punishing assertiveness, many of them bury their anger, ambition, judgment, even boundaries. They become soft on the surface, but hard underneath. Not because they're malicious, because they've never been allowed to admit they feel rage or pride or control. And Jung warned, when the shadow isn't integrated, it leaks out sideways. In passive aggression, in guilt trips, in martyr complexes, in emotional manipulation masked as deep care. It's not the empathic part that's dangerous, it's the repressed part underneath it. Fast forward to today, empath identity has become a cultural movement. On TikTok alone, the hashtag empath has passed 2 billion views. Self-diagnosis is common. I'm an empath, that's why people drain me. I'm an empath, that's why I cut people off. But something darker is happening under the surface. Some people are using the label to justify toxic behavior, avoid accountability, or claim moral superiority while continuing to harm others emotionally. This is what Jung would have called spiritual bypassing, avoiding self-awareness by dressing dysfunction in holy robes. You're not setting boundaries, you're punishing people with silence. You're not seeing patterns, you're projecting wounds. You're not empathic, you're emotionally extracting from others while avoiding your own shadow. Jung didn't oppose empathy, he warned against using it as a mask. He believed the shadow must be faced directly, owned, named, and integrated. Without that, even the most gifted empath becomes dangerous, not because they're evil, but because they're unconscious. This is why the dark empath is so hard to recognize. They don't look like a villain. They often don't even feel like one, but they haven't made peace with their own darkness, so they project it outward or control it in others. And they can do all of this with perfect empathy. Because empathy isn't virtue, it's a tool. And like any tool, its morality depends on who's holding it and why. Not all wounds bleed. Some sit quietly beneath warm smiles, long hugs, and the phrases that sound like love. If the dark empath is dangerous in theory, they are devastating in intimacy. Because when someone weaponizes empathy inside a relationship, the damage isn't just emotional, it's existential. You don't just lose trust, you begin to lose your sense of reality. In romantic relationships, the dark empath is rarely controlling in overt ways. They don't dictate your schedule, block your friends, or explode at dinner. Instead, they curate connection. They offer what seems like emotional depth, intense eye contact, poetic vulnerability, confessions of childhood wounds. You feel seen, safe, different from anything before. But underneath that intimacy is a quiet game of power. They know what breaks you, what soothes you, what patterns make you feel safe. At first, they use this to bond, later to bind. The moment your opinions diverge or your needs surface, the warmth begins to retract. They don't scream, they retreat. Cold, quiet, unavailable. You'll ask what's wrong, they'll say nothing. I just need space, but you'll feel the chill. That chill isn't silence, it's control. Many victims of dark empaths describe the same sensation. Confusion without confrontation. You never know what you did wrong. You just know something inside the relationship shifted, and somehow it's your fault. This is not love. It's orchestration of guilt, doubt, and slow psychological dependency. Dark empaths are often drawn to helping professions, therapy, coaching, ministry, education, not necessarily because they want to manipulate, but because they crave emotional access. These roles grant them authority, admiration, and deep entry into people's inner lives, and in many cases, they do help at first. But helping becomes transactional. It becomes a way to regulate their own self-worth through other people's wounds. Imagine a therapist who listens with care, but begins crossing boundaries, disclosing too much about themselves, becoming emotionally attached to your dependence, subtly punishing you when you grow. You leave sessions feeling guilty, unsure, responsible for their feelings. That's not therapy, that's entanglement. The most dangerous manipulations are the ones wrapped in kindness. In family dynamics, the dark empath often plays the peacemaker, the overgiver, or the one who always understands. But their giving is laced with expectation. They may remind you of how much they sacrifice, how deeply they feel for everyone, and how others constantly disappoint them. This isn't empathy, it's emotional martyrdom. Try setting a boundary with this type of person. Say no, detach. You'll hear, after everything I've done for you. Or worse, they'll go silent, leaving you to stew in guilt. What looks like selflessness is often subtle coercion. When empathy becomes leverage, it ceases to be love. One of the most difficult parts of surviving a relationship with a dark empath is that nothing feels overtly abusive. There's no screaming, no name-calling, no physical threat, just patterns of confusion, withdrawal, guilt-tripping, and emotional gaslighting. And because they appear sensitive, you question yourself before you ever question them. Psychologist Dr. Ramani Devasula calls this covert abuse. It's not defined by explosions, but by erosion, the slow wearing away of your confidence, clarity, and autonomy. You stop trusting your instincts, you over-explain, you apologize for needs, you lose track of who you were before them. This is the genius of the dark empath. They turn your own empathy into a prison. When these relationships end, what remains isn't just grief, it's shame. Victims often say things like, "I don't even know who I am anymore," or "maybe I was the problem." That's not an accident. That's the residue of a person who never attacked you directly, but consistently undermined your inner compass. And yet, this breaking point can also become the beginning of something else, awakening. Once you begin to see the patterns, the fog lifts, slowly, unevenly, but eventually you start to rebuild. You reframe your story. You recognize that someone using your emotional intelligence against you doesn't mean you were weak. It means you were unguarded. And when the empath finally learns to guard their empathy with discernment, the cycle ends. Not through revenge, not through bitterness, but through clarity. The most dangerous personality isn't always the one that wounds you loudly. Sometimes it's the one who knows exactly how to bandage you, just tight enough to keep you still. We've been taught to fear monsters that rage, but Carl Jung showed us something deeper, that the real danger is the shadow disguised as light, empathy used without integration, kindness offered without self-awareness. That's what the dark empath represents. They don't just confuse you, they erode your sense of self. They don't ask for control, you give it to them, because they appear safe. But now you've seen the pattern. Now the fog begins to clear. So, here are 3 takeaways to reclaim your clarity, your trust, and your strength. 1. Don't mistake empathy for safety. Empathy isn't always kindness. It's a tool, and tools can heal or harm depending on who's using them and why. If someone always understands you, but you feel more anxious around them, that's not connection, that's surveillance. Watch what they do with your vulnerability. 2. Boundaries are the filter. Use them without guilt. A dark empath's greatest weapon is your fear of hurting them. They thrive on your hesitation, your over-explaining, your silence. But the moment you stop needing their approval, their influence breaks. Silence doesn't make you cruel. Boundaries don't make you selfish. They make you sovereign. 3. Integrate your own shadow, or someone else will use it against you. The more you disown your anger, your intuition, your needs, the easier it is for someone to control them for you. Jung's lesson is clear. The only way to stop being emotionally hijacked is to confront your inner contradictions. When you bring your shadow into consciousness, no one can use it to manipulate you. So if this video stirred something inside you, if it reminded you of someone or of a version of yourself you've been too afraid to face, then let that discomfort become your signal. You're not broken, you're awakening. And in this awakening, you don't need to become colder, harsher, or less sensitive. You simply need to become conscious of what your empathy is worth and who no longer deserves access to it. If this made something click, subscribe and choose awareness over illusion, always.